Right now, someone you know is counting down the days. They're posting sunsets, planning the beach, talking about summer like it's a personality they finally get to put on for 3 months. And you're somewhere cooler and quieter, feeling a small dread you can't quite name, and wondering if something inside you is broken. It isn't. But the real reason is stranger than you think. You don't hate joy. Let's be clear about that from the very first line. You don't hate rest or warmth or the people asking you to come out. You hate this one specific version of joy, the version that arrives with sweat and glare and a social contract nobody signed but everyone enforces. The one that quietly requires you to look thrilled about every part of it. And here's the thing, almost nobody says out loud. Summer is the only season that shows up with a personality already attached. You don't get handed a mood in November. Nobody corners you in February and asks, with a little concern in their voice, why you aren't more into the cold. Winter lets you exist. But summer arrives, and suddenly there's an unspoken rule that your mood, your wardrobe, your whole social calendar should reorganize themselves around a star 93 million miles away. As if the sun were your manager now. As if you owed it enthusiasm. So what is actually happening inside a person who pulls back from all of this? Not morally, not as some character flaw you need to fix. Biologically, psychologically. Let's start somewhere a little uncomfortable, because the honest answer lives there. There is a real, measurable slice of the population whose nervous system takes in more of the world than everyone else's does. More sound, more light, more heat, more of everything, all the time, with the volume knob stuck a few notches higher than average. The psychologist Elaine Aron spent decades studying this. She called it sensory processing sensitivity, and her research estimates it describes somewhere between 15 and 20% of people. That's not a rounding error. That's 1 in 5. Their nervous systems don't malfunction. They aren't weaker. They simply process environmental input more deeply than the average system does, catching detail and intensity that other people filter out before it ever reaches awareness. Now think about what summer actually is for a system built like that. Summer is a sensory event that never clocks out. The heat doesn't pause. The light doesn't dim until it's almost time to sleep. The sound of everyone being outside at once, the mowers, the music, the traffic with the windows down, doesn't stop. For most people, all of that is background noise their brain quietly deletes. For a sensitive nervous system, none of it gets deleted. It keeps arriving. It keeps firing. It keeps asking to be processed, with nowhere to set it down. That's why the feeling isn't quite discomfort. Discomfort is sharp and specific. This is duller and heavier. It sits closer to a low, constant dread that follows you from June into August like a second shadow. You're not being dramatic. You're not too much. Your system is simply saying out loud what everyone else's system is quietly ignoring. And here's something even the highly sensitive rarely connect back to summer. Heat doesn't just make you uncomfortable. Heat changes how well you can think. Your brain runs best inside a surprisingly narrow temperature window. Slip past the top of it, and your body starts spending real resources just trying to cool you down. Blood moves toward your skin. Your pace slows. A fog rolls in. And the whole time, that cooling effort is quietly taxing the exact system you rely on to focus, to plan, to stay patient with the people around you. Researchers at Harvard, in a study led by Joseph Allen's team, watched this happen in real time. During a summer heat wave, they compared students living in air-conditioned dorms to students in older buildings without it. The ones in the hot rooms performed noticeably worse on cognitive tests, morning after morning, slower to react, less accurate on simple math, same students, same brains. The only real difference was the temperature of the room they woke up in. So if summer leaves you foggy, short-tempered, unable to hold a single thought all the way to its end, sit with what that actually means. That's not a weakness in your character. That's thermodynamics working on a 3-pound organ that was never designed to run hot. Doesn't that quietly reframe 100 of your worst summer afternoons? The ones where you assumed you were just lazy or difficult or failing at a season everyone else seemed to move through with ease? Now let's talk about the thing almost nobody suspects. Your sleep. The long days don't just lift the mood of the people who love them. They reach directly into your biochemistry, whether you consent to it or not. Back in 1980, a researcher named Alfred Louis and his colleagues proved something that sounds obvious now, but genuinely wasn't then. Light suppresses melatonin. Melatonin is the hormone that tells your body the day is over and it's time to power down. And the brighter and longer the day runs, the later that signal is allowed to arrive. So across June and July and August, your body gets the go-to sleep message later than it's supposed to. You lie down at the same hour. You just aren't sleepy yet because the sun stayed up 2 hours past when your grandparents' summers would have gone dark. And research tracking people across the seasons keeps landing on the same quiet pattern. Summer sleep tends to run shorter than winter sleep. Night after night after night, a little lost sleep sounds like nothing. But it doesn't stay a little, and it doesn't stay separate. It stacks. Weeks of slightly too short nights compound into something real, and they hit hardest if you're already the kind of person who turns irritable or anxious or emotionally raw the moment your sleep slips. So summer isn't only hot and loud. Summer is quietly, invisibly making you sleep deprived for 3 months in a row, and you may have spent years blaming your mood, your job, the people around you, never once suspecting that the season itself was thinning your sleep the entire time. You thought you were in a bad stretch. You were also exhausted. Both were true, and only one of them was obvious. Which brings us to something that has an actual clinical name, something the internet almost never bothers to mention. You've probably heard of seasonal depression, the winter kind. Dark mornings, heavy limbs, the pull to vanish under a blanket until spring finally shows up. The psychiatrist Norman Rosenthal is the one who first described that pattern and gave it its name in the 1980s. Seasonal affective disorder. By now, most people have heard of it, at least in passing. But here is what almost always gets left out of the story. Rosenthal, working alongside researchers like Thomas Ware, documented a second version, rarer, quieter in the culture, and it runs in the exact opposite direction. Summer pattern seasonal affective disorder. Some people just call it reverse SAD. It doesn't look anything like the winter kind. It doesn't drag you down into stillness. It winds you up. Agitation instead of sluggishness. Trouble falling asleep instead of sleeping the day away. A loss of appetite instead of a craving for comfort. A restless, irritable heat that seems to live just under the skin, climbing as the temperature climbs, and only easing when the season finally breaks and the first cool air returns. For most people who have a touch of it, it's mild. A background hum, not a diagnosis. Nobody needs to pathologize a preference for autumn. But if summer has ever felt genuinely hard for you, not just annoying, but actually heavy, the kind of heavy you couldn't explain to anyone without sounding ungrateful, then you should know this is a real, documented thing with a name attached to it. You didn't invent the feeling. You aren't the only one. Some nervous systems simply come alive in the darker half of the year and struggle in the bright one, and there is nothing shameful about being built that way. But that raises a strange question. Why would a season of warmth and abundance make any brain feel worse? Summer is supposed to be the easy one, the generous one. Shouldn't the difficult season be the cold, dark, scarce one? Step back far enough, and the whole logic flips over. For almost the entire span of human history, your ancestors had no refrigeration, no antibiotics, no cool, dark room to escape into when the heat became too much. And in that world, heat was not a vacation. Heat was a hazard. Warmth was exactly when food spoiled fastest and turned dangerous. Summer was when water grew scarce and had to be rationed. It was when insects swarmed, when parasites spread, when the fevers and sicknesses that could tear through an entire group found their season and moved. The bright, abundant months had real death folded quietly inside them. A nervous system that stayed a little wary as the heat rose wasn't defective. It was careful. It was the one that hesitated over the meat that smelled slightly wrong. The one that pulled its owner into the shade. The one that noticed the water source looked off. Caution in the hot season was not weakness. Across enough generations, it was survival, and survival is what gets handed down. So when summer arrives and you feel a resistance that begins before anything has actually happened, a low wariness you genuinely cannot explain, consider that you may not be overreacting to a barbecue invitation at all. You may be running a very old program, one that kept your particular line of ancestors alive long enough to eventually produce you. The discomfort might not be a bug in the design. There's a real chance the discomfort is the design. Now here is the reframe that tends to genuinely unsettle people, so take a breath before it lands. You have spent your entire life quietly assuming that the summer lovers are the normal ones, and you are the strange exception who has to keep explaining yourself. But look, really look, at what actually happens every June. The group chats wake up all at once. The plans start multiplying. Everyone's calendar clears at the same time, and a specific kind of pressure fills the air. The "we should all do something" energy. The feeling that an empty afternoon is a problem that needs solving immediately, together. And a lot of people ride that wave, not because their nervous system is genuinely craving it, but because everyone around them is riding it, and stepping off the wave feels almost impossible to admit. So sit with the possibility that you've had it backwards this whole time. Maybe the person performing relentless enthusiasm, posting every sunset, filling every weekend, is the one quietly bending to the crowd. And maybe your reluctance, the part of you that notices the heat, that rations its social energy, that would honestly rather stay in, is simply the more accurate reading of the environment. You're not failing to feel what everyone else feels. You might just be less willing to perform a feeling you don't have. Some of this, though, isn't biology at all. Some of it is memory. Seasons carry emotional residue. They soak it up and hold on to it. Summer may have been the hardest stretch of the year for you at some point, without you ever labeling it that way. Maybe school was the only structure that held your days together, and summer dissolved that structure into shapeless, unbearable time. Maybe something important ended in July. Maybe you grew up in a house where the heat made everyone tense and short and loud and too close together, with no cool room to retreat to. Your brain is not good at separating then from now when the sensory cues are identical. The smell of sunscreen, the exact quality of late afternoon light slanting through a window, the specific drone of a lawnmower 2 yards over. These are not just sensations, they're doorways. They drop you straight back into an earlier summer whether you agreed to the trip or not. So when a nameless resistance rises in you before the season has even done anything, before there's any real reason for it, there's a genuine chance your nervous system is answering a summer from years ago, one you were certain you had left behind you, not the summer on this year's calendar, an older one, still running underneath. And underneath all of it sits one more thing, quieter than the rest: identity. Summer has a look, a vibe, an entire aesthetic it expects you to wear. And if that vibe simply isn't yours, if you're pale and completely at peace with it, if crowds drain something out of you, if your idea of a perfect afternoon is a book in a room whose temperature you fully control, then summer becomes one long stretch of feeling slightly out of step with the culture happening all around you. Humans measure themselves against their surroundings. It's automatic. Spend 3 straight months feeling like the only person who didn't get the memo, and it quietly erodes your sense of self, so gradually you don't even notice it happening, until September finally arrives, and a wave of relief hits you that's almost embarrassing in how large it is. Pay attention to that relief. That relief is data. It is telling you something true about what you actually need in order to feel like yourself again. Because here's what almost everyone gets wrong about you: preferring the cool, the dim, the quiet is not a deficiency to apologize for. The psychologist Jonathan Cheek has argued that introversion isn't a single trait at all, but several distinct ones, and one of them he named thinking introversion. It's a pull toward reflection, toward imagination, toward the inner world. It has nothing to do with shyness, nothing to do with fear of other people. It's simply a mind that does its deepest work turned inward, and the people most at home alone with their own thoughts are usually the ones who have built a rich interior worth being at home in. That inner room didn't furnish itself. You built it, slowly, over years, Partly, maybe because the alternative, forcing yourself to love the heat and the crowds and the glare, never once actually worked for you. So you went inward instead, and you made something in there. That's not a consolation prize handed to people who lost at summer. That's a genuine cognitive and emotional asset, the exact kind of interior depth that a huge share of people spend years in therapy trying to build from scratch. So notice what you've truly been doing all these summers: the retreating, the carefully rationed energy, the genuine physical relief when the first gray cloud finally rolls across the sky. You've been reading all of that as failing at a season everyone else seems to pass through effortlessly. It was never failure. It was self-knowledge. Knowing precisely what a thing costs you and then choosing to protect yourself from it is something an enormous portion of the population is still actively struggling to learn, and many of them never manage it at all. You already know. Some part of you has always known. You just mistook knowing something true about yourself, something that happened to diverge from the majority, for proof that something was wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. It just means you were paying attention the whole time. Right now, someone you know is counting down the days to summer. Let them have every one of them. You were never broken for quietly counting down to its end. If any part of this felt like it was describing you from the inside, say so in the comments. Tell everyone what summer actually feels like when you're the one living it, behind the sunscreen and the golden hour posts and the polite performance of tolerance. Because there are far more people than you'd ever guess sitting in a cool, dim, air-conditioned room right now, scrolling, waiting for just one person to finally say it out loud.